So I'd like to introduce, most of you won't need any introduction, to Elizabeth Forsythe, who's a consultant in genetics in London, Lukas Foggensteiner, who's a consultant nephrologist in Birmingham, and Sarah Flack, who's a dietetic specialist in London as well, at the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital Clinic. So I'd like to introduce you guys to, or ask you to come up and talk about obesity and how we manage weight in BBS. So I think Elizabeth first.
Thank you. Where's the clicker? Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I'm delighted to be one of the three musketeers, Phil. I don't think we've been called that before, but that's a good start. So we're going to be talking about obesity today and how we manage weight in Bardet-Biedl syndrome. And then there's a little add-on at the end about the registry, an update for you about the registry. And this is an overview. So I'm going to start by talking about obesity and BBS. Then Lukas is going to talk about current drug treatments and what we're doing. And then I will give you an update on our clinical trial. Sarah is going to talk about diet and exercise. And then we're going to have the Slido. I don't have that in here, but we're going to have the Slido. And then at the end, I'm going to give you an update about the registry. So, oops. So, but before I start talking specifically about BBS, I wanted to kind of zoom out and talk a little bit about obesity in general, because we know that obesity is increasing worldwide, and we know it's happening pretty much across the world. And for those of you who can't see, I'm showing a graph here that shows time from 1974 to 2004, and on the y-axis I've got childhood overweight, including obesity. But actually, it's the same pattern in adults as well, and we can see it's going up in lots of different countries all over the world. Would anybody like to hazard a guess as to why that's happening? Yep, that's a great one. Absolutely. So sometimes people say that obesity can relate to people not having enough willpower or something like that. But actually, we know that that this has been happening all over the world, that weight has been increasing for a long time all over the world. And it's not because we all, in the 70s at some point, decided that we were going to lose our willpower, or that we were going to be lazy or whatever. It's actually because the world around us has changed. It's not that we have changed, it's the world around us that has changed. And so the food that is readily available to us now is much more dense in calories, and it's produced to make us want to eat more and to make us crave more. And at the same time, in the last couple of decades, we've realized that actually our genetics has a big effect on our weight. So for many people around the world, it's lots of different little genetic factors that influence our weight. And we've done lots of research studies, or other people have done lots of research studies to try and work this out. But it's lots of little genetic factors for most of us. But of course, we know that in BBS, it is that one gene that affects you that means that you are much more likely to be overweight or obese. And we've looked at weight in the clinics over the years, and I'm showing a graph now of weight. And this was for the adults. It was a study we did a couple of years ago, and we looked at weight for our adults in the clinic. And what we found was that around 7% of people had a weight in what we call the healthy range. That's a BMI between 18.5 and 25. And then about 25% had a weight within the BMI range of 25 to 30, so that's what we call overweight. And generally, we think that's probably okay. That probably doesn't really affect the health in your body that much. But then when we go over a BMI of 30, that's when we start to get a little bit more nervous and a bit more worried about the effect that the overweight can have on the body. And I'm showing another graph here, and really what this shows is what we know from the general population as well, which is that as we age, our weight tends to go up. And that is the same for people with BBS. So as people with BBS age, their weight tends to go up. So we become increasingly aware of managing weight over time in people who have BBS. And this is a quote from a parent who I think is sitting in the audience today, and it really struck a chord with me. So this is a parent who said to me once in the clinics, managing my son's weight is like a Sisyphus job. And Sisyphus was from Greek mythology, and he was someone who had to push a very, very heavy boulder up a mountain every day. And at the end of the day, the boulder would roll back down again. And it was that sensation of having to work really, really hard to manage your child's weight every day. And then the moment you step back to relax, because sometimes you have to relax a little bit, it would roll back down again. And that feeling it's quite disheartening, and it's really difficult. And I suspect quite a lot of you will recognize that feeling either for yourselves or for your child. So I wanted to move on, and I wanted to talk a little bit about hunger, because we know that people with Bardet-Biedl syndrome tend to feel more hunger than other people. And hunger is really complex. And I'm showing you a diagram here that's also very complex, because hunger is very complex, of how this works in the body. And I don't need you to understand all bits of it, but the message is that we get signals from different parts of our body. So whether it's from our gut, from our stomach, from our fat tissue, from our pancreas, and those signals are sent to the brain, and then the brain does a very complex calculation and decides how hungry we should be in compared to our energy expenditure. So food intake versus energy expenditure. And so why do people with BBS feel very hungry? Well, it's because we know that the BBS proteins are required in one of these hunger pathways to work well. So we know that when people are lacking a BBS protein, or when the BBS proteins don't work so well, then that hunger pathway doesn't work quite as well. And there is effectively a stop button in the brain that tells our body, you need to stop taking in more food, you're done, you've got enough energy to help you with your output. And that stop button doesn't really work in BBS so well. And so as a result, the brain is saying you need to have more food than actually what your body requires. And I wanted to also differentiate between hunger, which is a signal in your body that we've just talked about, and eating behavior, because hunger obviously feeds into eating behavior, but there are other things as well that are involved in eating behavior. And I put a couple of those down here. So for example, stress. I don't know whether anybody else is like me, and when you feel very stressed, you sort of grab the chocolate very quickly and have some chocolate. Does anybody else recognize that? Yes, I think so. Or when I've worked very, very hard and I've had to do a lot of paperwork, which I find really boring, then I have a little reward, which is a slice of cake. I don't know whether anybody else recognizes that too. Yeah? Okay. So it's not just hunger. There are other things that feed into what we eat. Yeah. Our psychologist is just covering our dietitian's ears here. Okay. But there are also other things like habit, or if we're bored, we tend to eat a little bit more. Or if we have complex behavioral things. So sometimes if you have some autistic features, that can feed the eating, and the autistic features can sort of interact, and that can become quite complex. And I know that our psychology team and dietetics team are going to be doing a workshop this afternoon and talking about this a little bit more. So I would encourage you all to go along if you would like some tips or tricks from them. So how do we treat obesity and BBS? Well, we look at a couple of different things. And one of the things we look at, the first thing we look at, is diet. And our dietitian, Sarah, is going to be talking about that very shortly. We look at exercise. We are increasingly looking at medication. We have sort of looked at surgery before, and I know some people have had some good experiences with surgery, but generally we don't find that it works so well in BBS. So we're not doing that so much anymore. And then we look at psychological strategies, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm not going to talk about the diet, but I am going to quickly talk about exercise, because I feel very strongly about it. And those of you who've seen me do a talk about it a couple of years ago know that already. And what I wanted to point out is that we know that exercise, it's great for managing weight. It's an important component of managing weight, but it also does so many other great things for your body. So it helps balance your mood. It helps keep your brain sharp. It reduces your risk of dementia or delays it. It reduces your risk of heart attacks and of strokes. So it does so many great things for you. And I wanted to challenge those of you who are here today who maybe are not so physically active or don't do a lot of exercise. I wanted to challenge you that in the next couple of weeks, I would like you to consider whether there is some kind of physical activity that you could take up. And it doesn't have to be running a marathon, and it doesn't have to be taking up rugby. It could be things like going for a walk or maybe taking up swimming. And ideally, if you can find a friend to do it with, that works even better, because that means we tend to commit to doing it and doing it on a regular basis. And then next year, come back and tell me what you did and what you enjoyed, so I can share your experience with my patients in the clinic. I think that'd be really great. And I wanted to highlight again, and I've said this before, that there is no pill that exists, there is no medication that exists that can do the amount of good for your body that exercise can do for you. And I'll leave it there, but I hope you'll have a think about it and take me up on my challenge. And then the other thing we think about is medication, and Lukas is going to talk about that in more detail in a minute. But I think it's a really exciting time, actually, in terms of for those people who need the medication to help manage their weight. It's a really exciting time, because previously we didn't have much in the way of drugs that we could offer to people. But actually, in the last couple of years, we're getting more and more drugs that are available. They're becoming more and more effective. And I think in the next couple of years, we will see more options for people who need help to manage their weight. It's kind of on the cusp at the moment. I know some of you have tried some of these weight loss drugs, and Lukas is going to talk about that. There are some issues around availability, but I think that will change in the next couple of years. And this is just one quick slide from a paper that was published on someone who has BBS, who tried one of these drugs. And what the graph here shows is that they actually had a very good effect. But Lukas will give you a lot more information about this. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that in addition to the Bardet-Biedl syndrome clinics, there are now also new obesity clinics. And I think some of you have attended those and found them quite useful. And there are both clinics for adults, which have been around for a long time, but there are also now these clinics called the complications of excess weight, or the Q clinics for children, where they look at weight in a holistic way. And certainly we have started to refer a couple of people to those clinics, because I think that's enormously beneficial, because we are aware that there is a limit to the amount of help we can provide in the BBS clinics, because we only get to see you really every 2 years now, every 18 months to 2 years. So we would like you to have extra support for weight management. And with that, I'm going to pass on to Lukas, who's going to tell you about drug treatments.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm Lukas Foggensteiner. I'm a nephrology consultant, so I deal with kidneys like David does for the adult patients who come to our Birmingham clinic. But working with my endocrinology colleague, Jeremy Tomlinson, we also, as physicians, have tried to help our patients with the management of overweight and obesity, which is, as you all know, a big problem in the BBS community. So when doctors such as myself talk about overweight and obesity, we're using those terms quite specifically. They're technical terms, actually, in medicine that are defined by the World Health Organization. And when we talk about overweight, we mean a body mass index, a BMI, of between 25 and 30, and obesity as a BMI of over 30. I mean, the general public use those terms a little bit more vaguely, but I think it's worth just kind of clarifying that. So I'm going to talk about our experience with a group of drugs that Elizabeth's already started to introduce, which is GLP-1 agonists, which are a bunch of drugs that those of you who sort of, follow the newspapers and television, etc., can't have escaped hearing about, because they're a big topic of discussion. The one that's most well known is semaglutide, and the trade name for that's Wegovy or Ozempic. And you probably read about this. This is a drug that was launched initially for diabetes, but has a role in the management of weight, and it's become quite well known. What I'm not going to talk about is setmelanotide, which is another drug that we've talked about in this conference before, which is a drug that's really been designed very specifically for the problems that people with increased appetite with BBS have. So I'm not going to focus on that, although I'll happily answer questions about that. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background. What's the story behind these GLP-1 agonists? Where did they come from? Where did semaglutide come from? Well, the story is kind of interesting, and it starts with a rather menacing-looking fish. So when scientists are interested in human genes and human disease, they often start by looking at animals. And the gene of interest here, which is the glucagon gene, was first isolated from this anglerfish quite a long time ago now, in 1977. Back in the day, these fish and others like it were a very popular subject of research. And when I did my PhD, I was just telling Elizabeth earlier, in Cambridge in the 90s, we had a tank of pufferfish and zebrafish from which we isolated DNA for various genes of interest. I don't think that happens anymore, actually, but that's where the gene came from. This is a particularly scary looking creature, but there is another scary creature in the story, and that's this fella here, the Gila monster, Heloderma suspectum. Now, this is a creature that lives in the desert in Utah, and why is it of interest to us in the story of GLP-1 agonists? Well, the reason, oh my goodness, I didn't know that guy was going to be moving when I put that slide up. Anyway, that's even more scary. So you don't want to be bitten by one of these bad boys, because if you are, you'll end up with severe pain because of neurotoxins in the saliva. You'll also end up with bleeding, low blood pressure. But there was a weird thing that someone noticed, which was that people who'd been bitten had low blood glucoses. So why was that? Well, doctors who are interested in the management of diabetes got a bunch of these Gila monsters and isolated from their saliva a very interesting molecule. And this is in the 1980s this happened. The molecule was exendin-4. And it's a small protein molecule that came from the saliva of this creature. And it had an effect on glucose. And so it was of interest to the diabetic community. And it was really people doing research in diabetes that took this forward. There is a kind of interesting story of an American researcher who collected up a bunch of these Gila monsters, took them to his lab, and did all this work over a period of about a decade. So that molecule is really the progenitor of the GLP-1 agonists, these drugs that we're going to talk about. This is a bit of a useless slide, given the small size of the screen and how long this is, but it's a timeline of the development of these drugs. And here's the starting point, the anglerfish isolation of the gene. Here's the isolation of exendin-4 from the Gila monster. And then a whole bunch of research studies were done on these molecules, primarily in the management of diabetes, because they were shown to regulate or help regulate the glucose. But what the research studies also indicated was that patients with diabetes given these drugs lost weight. And that was a rather unexpected finding. It wasn't a predicted finding at all. It was unexpected, but clearly the drug companies realized they might be onto something quite interesting here, because we've heard from Elizabeth how prevalent obesity now is, how big a problem it is. Could these drugs help actually in the management of obesity? And the answer is, well, they probably can. So what are they? Well, GLP, glucagon-like peptide 1, and GIP, what do they do? I mean, they're synthesized and secreted from the gut in response to food intake. So when you eat something, your gut fills up, your stomach swells up, your small bowel fills up, these molecules are released, and they do a number of really interesting things. They help regulate the amount of insulin that you release in response to that, but they also tell your brain to stop eating more. And that's the feedback mechanism that these GLP-1 agonist drugs work on. So these are drugs that mimic that. These are drugs that, if you give them, they fool your brain into thinking that you're full. That's kind of how they work. Now, how they actually do that, I think that's a black box. I don't think anyone really knows what the kind of molecular basis for that is inside the brain, but that's what they do. So what do they do? So they're secreted in response to food intake, help regulate post-meal glucose homeostasis, glucose regulation. They stimulate insulin from the islets. And they have these gastrointestinal effects. They regulate gastric emptying, feeling of satiety and fullness, and energy intake. So that is what these class of drugs that we're talking about do. They mimic that effect. So let's just pause and think about obesity as a problem now in the public and in BBS. Now, we've already heard from Elizabeth how common being overweight and obese is. This is not BBS, this is not BBS patients, this is just the general public. So overweight, which is BMI of over 25 and under 30 is, it's almost most people now. And obese, BMI of over 30, is a quarter of the population. But if you take overweight and obese together, that's 2/3 of the population now. And this is not people with BBS, this is just everyone, really. So it's a big problem. And in the BBS clinic, it's the same, but just a bit worse. Actually, the distribution of overweight and obesity is just shifted to the right a little bit. So in our clinic, and this is data from the adult clinic, in our clinic, not many people have a BMI of under 20. That's a little bit underweight. If you have a BMI of under 20, you're quite skinny, really. Only about 1 in 10 people have a BMI in the normal range of 21 to 25. 20%, 25 to 30, that's the overweight range. And this big bunch here is the obese range. And you can see that over half of our patients with BBS fall into that category. So, it's something that is a very relevant issue for people with BBS. And in fact, I often ask patients in the clinic with BBS, what are the things that really trouble you? What would you want us to try and help you with? And the things that tend to come up are the eyesight issues and the weight issues. So it's, I know, recognized by the BBS community as a big problem as well. So what about the use of these drugs in non-diabetics? Well, this is one of the first trials of the most well-known of this class of drugs, semaglutide, in patients who are overweight or obese. And this is a graph here which shows the percentage of body mass decline on this axis versus time in weeks here. So as you can see, 68 weeks, over a year. And patients were given, in this particular study, either a dummy tablet, a placebo, or they were given real semaglutide. In fact, sorry, it wasn't a tablet, it was an injection. Semaglutide is a subcut injection. So they were given a dummy injection or genuine injection and then followed up. And this is a technique that's widely used in medical research, a randomized control trial. And the people who were given the dummy injection had almost no change in weight. They lost 2% of their body weight over that year and a bit time point. Patients who were given the real injection, the semaglutide, rapidly lost weight over the first year, and they in fact lost 16% of their body weight in 1 year. So that's actually, for weight loss intervention, quite extraordinary. There are not many interventions in weight loss that that are that dramatic. that's the kind of thing you might see with bariatric surgery, although sometimes you can even get faster weight loss with bariatric surgery. But with drug interventions, that is quite extraordinary, really. So that is very interesting. And these aren't people who are diabetic. This was a study in people who are just overweight. So that was a study using this drug semaglutide, and there are two brand names that the company used for it. One is Ozempic and one is Wegovy. And if you read up about those, you'll find a lot of information on the internet. These drugs have been, in a way, a victim of their own success. They have become very, very widely used. And the problem, as Elizabeth alluded to, is that availability has become challenging. So there are others. It's not the only one. Exenatide, which is the most similar to the molecule from the lizard I showed you earlier, is manufactured as well. Lixenatide, dulaglutide, and liraglutide, they're all pretty similar, actually. And the results of studies using those in weight loss have been relatively similar. So NICE has now recommended these drugs in people with obesity without diabetes. NICE recommended them for patients with diabetes about 2 years ago, but they've recently issued guidance for their use in patients without diabetes. So this is the NICE recommendation for the use of these drugs. And what do they say? Well, they say semaglutide is recommended as an option for weight management, including weight loss and weight maintenance, alongside a reduced calorie diet and increased physical activity in adults if used for a maximum of 2 years within a specialist weight management service providing multidisciplinary management of overweight or obesity. So, and then they tell you what the BMI needs to be, a BMI of at least 35 or at least 30 if there's some other criteria that are met. So does that mean we can use these drugs? Well, Jeremy Tomlinson and I kind of scratched our heads and we thought, well, we've probably ticked the box for a specialist weight management service. We've got a clinical psychologist, a dietitian, physicians of various sorts. So I think we ticked that box. So we started to prescribe GLP-1 agonists at the beginning of this year. This came out at the end of last year. So soon after this recommendation came out, we started to use these drugs. But we soon hit a problem. And this is from the BMJ a couple of weeks ago. GLP-1 agonist shortages hit patients. And we prescribed semaglutide and other GLP-1 agonists to about half a dozen patients with BBS. And all of them, without exception, have run into difficulties with accessing these drugs, getting supplies, basically. So that is a problem that hopefully will be resolved with time as the drug companies who manufacture these drugs increase production. And this is, why is this shortage occurred? Well, this is why, actually, because this is just, I did a quick search on Google for private weight loss clinics, and this is the page I found. And you can just log in to this weight loss service here. They'll give you a consultation online with someone, a dietitian or something. And then for £275 per pen, you will get Wegovy sent to you through the post. And I'm not recommending anyone does this. I'm just showing you this as an explanation for why the NHS has been denied access to drugs in practice. It is for this reason. And these drugs are being used inappropriately, really, in many cases. So I'm going to do some case studies now. So these are the patients, some of the patients that we've actually given semaglutide to. So this is the first one. And this is a patient who weighed 161 kilograms, so BMI was really very high. Started semaglutide. Happened to the weight between April and August. Patients lost lost about 10 kilograms, just under 10 kilograms. And that's not, that's not a long time. That's 4 months. So that's a very significant amount of weight loss to see in that time period. And this is what this particular BBS patient said. They reported feeling fantastic, reduced portion size, sometimes doesn't finish meals, doesn't have seconds, no longer feels constantly hungry, doesn't snack in between meals. And those are the typical benefits that people on these drugs report. There are some side effects, and these are kind of inevitable and really are due to what the drug actually does physiologically, because it makes you feel full. And so nausea and bloating, just the kind of symptoms you get if you've had an excessive meal. And those symptoms can limit the drug in some individuals. So here's another patient. This patient had a weight of 80 kilograms, not so heavy as the first one, but BMI was still quite high, as the patient wasn't particularly tall. Started semaglutide in May and ran out in August, but the recorded weight in August was 67 kilograms. So that's, again, a significant weight loss to see in that short period of time. The third patient had a weight of 117 kilograms, started semaglutide in April, promptly lost quite a bit of weight, from 117 to 111 in only a few months, ran out of semaglutide here, and very interestingly, weight then plateaued at that level. So, I mean, that's kind of telling you really that the semaglutide is working, and stopping it has just stopped that weight loss. So that's semaglutide. There is another drug that was on Elizabeth's slide as well, which is tirzepatide, and that is another drug that you're going to see more of, I think, in discussions around weight. It's similar to semaglutide. It's a drug that has GLP-1 agonist properties, but it also does a few other things. And the big study of this drug in weight management in obesity was published, I think it was in January of this year, and that showed a very dramatic reduction in weight, 23% weight loss, I think it was, over the study period. The weight loss starts off quite fast and then seems to plateau as you go. But it's a drug that looks very promising in the world of weight management, and I suspect it's something that we are going to see in our clinics in due course. So, yeah, that's all I've got to tell you.
Okay, so that leads perfectly on to my next bit, because Lukas said at the beginning of his talk, he said, I'm not going to be talking about setmelanotide, and so now I am going to be talking about setmelanotide. So this is an update on a clinical trial that we've been running, or we ran for a couple of, we've only got 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to be quick. It's an update on a clinical trial that we've run over the last couple of years, and I wanted to give you a bit of information about it. I've talked about it at previous conferences, but I'll do a little bit of a summary because I know that there are new people here as well today. So setmelanotide is another weight loss drug, so it's different from these GLP-1 agonists. It's a different kind of weight loss drug, and it works specifically on the pathway that affects hunger in Bardet-Biedl syndrome. And what I'm showing you here is the outcome paper of the trial that we've taken part of, looking at how well this drug works in terms of hunger and weight loss. And to summarize, just to give an overview of this trial, it was an international trial, so there were people in lots of different countries who took part. And it was people both with BBS and a few people with Alström's who took part. And for those people who are not familiar with Alström, it's a related condition, but it's not the same as BBS. And there were 2 people from the UK who took part in this trial. And then what they did was they started off by giving some people setmelanotide and some people called a placebo, so injections that didn't contain the medication. And then after 14 weeks, they gave everybody setmelanotide. And then they looked at the hunger and they looked at the weight to see if there was a change. And after 52 weeks, they looked at all the participants here over the age of 12 and looked at how many of them got a weight loss that was greater than 10%. And in this case, it was 32% got a weight loss of greater than 10% of their body weight. And what they also found was that this drug seemed to work. There was a difference. It seemed to work better in people with BBS than in people with Alström. And these are some of the outcomes. So I'm showing some graphs here, and what they found was that setmelanotide reduced hunger. And for those of you who can see it, there's a bit here. Can't work the pointer, but there's a bit. The first bit here, the dark grey bit, shows the what we call the placebo-controlled part of the experiment. So that's the first 14 weeks, where some people, the people with the blue dots, had the placebo, so that's the injections without the drug, and the people with the red dots had the drug. And what you can see happens is that their hunger goes down. So the hunger scores go down over time. And you can see those who didn't have the drug for the first 2 weeks, for the first 14 weeks, their hunger was roughly the same, and then it went down once they started on the drug. And we also saw that setmelanotide reduced weight over time. So the top graph here shows change in body weight in adults, and the bottom one shows change in body weight in children. So we saw an effect in both adults and children. And of course, with clinical trials, and drugs that aren't licensed yet, there are a couple of different. We're now at a phase where we're looking how things progress. So we may need to do further clinical trials, and certainly whenever we think about a new drug, it has to go through the NICE, the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence, and they have to review whether the NHS is in a position to pay for the drug. So this is the phase that we're in now. So we don't know whether it will become available in the UK for people in the future, but I think there is, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is good reason to be hopeful that there is a selection of medications that will be available for weight loss management for people with BBS. And I'm going to pass on to Sarah, who's going to talk about diet and exercise. Okay.
Okay, brilliant, it's working. So I thought we'd start with a quiz while I get myself together up here. So the first question, which of these foods contains the most calories? So the first option is a can of cola, which is option A. Option B, a whole avocado. And option C, a fried egg. So we can do this. Perhaps we should do it with a bit of movement. If you think it's option A, can you stand up now? So that's the can of cola. Or wave your hand at me. Okay, a few. Okay, then option B, an avocado. And that's most of the room. Okay, and option C, the fried egg. Okay. You've done very well. The actual answer is the avocado. I don't normally talk about calories that often. An avocado has about 260 calories in a whole avocado. So it's more than double in the Coke or the fried egg. But we don't eat calories, we eat food. It's really important that we look at what's in the food. It's not just about the energy. So looking at those food types, some of them are possibly better choices than others. Next question. How much activity should we be doing as adults? These are UK recommendations. So is it option A, an hour a day? You might, yes, so recommendations vary around the world. Option B, 150 minutes a week. Or option C, half an hour a day, 210 minutes a week. Okay, it was fairly mixed on the answers there. The actual answer is 150 minutes a week. Now that only works out as about 20-ish minutes a day, so it's not that much activity to try and fit in as adults. So while we're all thinking about that, I'm going to move on to a little bit more about diet and BBS. So, I thought it would be useful to start with some background about why diet and BBS is so tricky. So we've heard lots about this hyperphagia, this drive to eat, but we also know that if you have BBS, you have lower energy requirements than someone else of the same age. So it's a double whammy. You feel hungry, you want to eat, but your requirements are already lower. So it's really hard. I'm often asked in clinic if I can tell you how much calories your child needs. And the really easy answer is no. Everybody is different. Everybody needs a different amount of energy to control their rate of weight gain. In pediatrics particularly, limited diet can be an issue, and that's what I would focus on in the clinic. So it's really, really important that everybody has individualised dietary advice. You can share tips, that's brilliant, but if you eat exactly the same as your friend with BBS, it might not be the right amount for you. And I thought it would be useful to share some of our outcomes from the paediatric clinic at Great Wall Street. If anyone's particularly interested, you can Google BBS clinical outcomes, gosh, and find the whole lot. But just to share the headlines, because we've talked about weight increasing with age, I wanted to share some of the really good success stories that we've had in our clinic. So the key message to take away is that increasing BMI in childhood is not always inevitable, but it's really tough. So for those that can see this pie chart, if you look at it, it's really, really impressive that about 60% of our kids have managed to maintain or reduce their BMI SED score. And 7% at this time have maintained a healthy BMI. Now, these aren't big numbers, but it's incredibly impressive. I thought you might be sitting here thinking, well, those kids have come in with a healthy BMI and they've stayed the same, but that isn't always the case. So on this slide, for those that can see, 4 out of the 7 kids that have had this healthy BMI achieved that on their 4th or 5th visit to the clinic. So as you know, our clinics are now every 18 months to 2 years. So that is, my brain's gone, that's after about sort of 5 to 8 years, something like that, of all that focus work that you're doing. So keep going. It's really worth trying your best. I know it's really hard, and we're there to support you any way we can. To show how difficult this is, I'm going from positive to negative, I thought I would show you what one of those children that has achieved and maintained a healthy BMI is actually eating. So this is a 12-year-old girl, and I think you'll see by the end of this that they're not actually eating very much, and it will show how hard it actually is. So this youngster for breakfast had 2 wheat pillows with skim milk, a pear, a slice of toast with a teaspoon of peanut butter. For lunch, a bagel with low-fat spread, jam and cheese, carrot and pepper sticks, and a small banana. And then in the evening, a small portion of cooked chicken with half a teaspoon of sweet chili sauce, mixed grains and vegetables, and a pudding of strawberries. You might notice there's no snacks at all during that day, and this youngster just drinks water. They also are quite active. And so this is really tricky. If we're thinking about the hyperphagia, this drive to eat, this is incredibly hard to do. So this I'm sharing because if you're struggling and finding weight is going up, it's to show how hard it can be. It's not about aiming for this. Nobody should be going, right, that's what I need to eat. This isn't what I'm saying. Come and chat to one of us and we'll help in the clinic. So, what I was asked to really focus on was looking at how we make lasting diet or activity changes. So we're now in September. It's a long time since January when we made our New Year's resolutions. I want, if you have kept all of your New Year's resolutions, can you wave now? Okay. Oh, there is someone at the back. Well, I think that person needs a big round of applause. Okay. So from that, we can see it's really hard. Change is really difficult. And we need to be kind to ourselves and make sure we don't feel we're failing when something goes wrong. It's important to realise that new habits take several weeks to develop. And it's really important to just work on one thing at a time. But my key message today is always look for the easy wins. And they will be different for each of us about what those things might be. But I'm going to share things that I think might be an easy win. So my first one is sleep. Helen mentioned this morning that there's work going on looking at sleep in BBS. So we know if we don't get good sleep, we eat more. And you tend to eat higher energy foods like crisp chocolate biscuits because you think it's going to give you that little bit of a hit to keep going through the next day. But if this is happening every day and you've got lower energy requirements, this can cause an increase in weight much more rapidly than you'd expect. So speak to the BBS team, speak to your GP, see if there's something that can be done. It's not guaranteed that there's a simple solution, but work on it over that time. And think if there's anything you can do. Can you go to bed earlier? Can you drop out the caffeine at night? Chat to your dietitian as well in case there's something that we can help with. My other favourite top tip is to look at our drink choices. We typically eat the same amount of food, whatever we drink. So you can have a really easy win by changing what you're drinking to something lower energy, something like from a milkshake or fizzy drink to water or another lower energy drink. So to put this in context, a 250 ml bottle of orange juice contains about 100 calories, which is the same as 2.5 large oranges. Now, none of us probably would sit and eat two and a half large oranges at go. So drink a glass of water, eat an orange, and you'll save some calories. I realise this slide isn't very helpful for everybody, but for those that can see, and I will describe it after, it's really useful to look at the energy density of the foods. Have a good look at the two pictures. I'd be happy with either bowl of food, a plate of salad. So they're both full of food. They've both got the same ingredients. But I'm now going to show you the calorie difference between the two. So the salad on the left had 800 calories and the salad on the right 400. And that was done by grilling meat, reducing the starchy carbohydrates, cutting down the avocado a bit and filling up with extra salad. For those that can't see this, I'm more than happy to do something around the buffet table later. Because there's a lot, just grab me. So there's a couple of other portion controls. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to whiz through. My favourite one here is look at your plate size. Today our plates are typically 7 centimetres bigger than when I was growing up. And so they hold more food. Just by changing your plate size, you can eat about 20% less food. There's some techniques about using your child's hand size for portion sizes, but I'm going to skip on. There's the plate method of portion control, where you use half a plate of vegetables, fill the rest up with protein and starch. I'm just whizzing as fast as I can to get through. Now, just to talk a little bit about activity. Again, we've heard all about its benefits. It's really important. Elizabeth has already highlighted lots of this information to do something that you enjoy, build in small amounts of activity, set an achievable goal, something like that. But I want to show the two chief medical officers' infographics about physical activity. So for children, the key message is activity is about getting strong and moving more. You need to be aiming for 60 minutes of activity and spreading it through the day. For adults, I think this is a much better message. So the key message is physical activity, some is good, more is better. Every minute you do counts. So it doesn't matter if we're hitting this 150 minutes at all at the beginning, but that's the target to aim for. And the really key message is it's never too late. So start today, maybe not today, maybe start Monday. And one final bit from me is that it's really, really important to check in every now and then to think if something's gone a bit awry. So we're all going to be eating and drinking more than normal this weekend. So maybe at some point next week it's worth just checking in and making a change. I've just been on holiday in the States, and for the beginning of my holiday, the portions were enormous. I've got a few pictures up there of some of the food that was served. So rather than a small plate of sushi, it was, 10 California rolls. The light bite at the top was meant to be a small starter, and it arrived with a whole garlic bread. And the granola, so there's a mixture that I was going for a really healthy breakfast, and I ended up with this small Kilner jar filled with yogurt, granola, and just a touch of fruit around the edge, but I did eat it all. So the important bit is that at the beginning of the holiday, we saw all these portions were huge. By the end of the holiday, I'm really sad to admit that we're going, oh, that's a bit tiny, because we got so used to these massive portions. And so you do need to take time to reset and think, if something's changed, and restart. It's never a fail, it's always about starting again. Right, I'm going to stop, because I know we've run out of time.